my name is Stephanie Mallow, student physical therapist. This is skill 26, dependent one-person sit pivot transfers while maintaining precautions. To prepare for this transfer, see skill 17 for proper setup of the wheelchair and the bed, as well as skill 22 for how to scoot the patient to the edge of the bed. Each of the following precautions will begin with the patient angled away from the direction of the transfer, with their feet, knees, and hips angled away from the direction of the transfer as well. This is the first precaution, a spinal fusion precaution. So first we're going to instruct the patient to sit upright, slightly forward of the hips. Remind them not to bend at the trunk, and if they need to bend, they can bend at the waist, as well as do not twist at the trunk. Sitting up straight removes stress from the surgical site. So the healthcare provider will first place one foot on the outside of the patient's foot that is away from the direction of the transfer, and the other foot will go in between the patient's feet. I will use both of my legs to squeeze the knee and guide the patient into the wheelchair. And then I will also use my arm as a guard to keep the patient from bending too far forward. I will grab both sides of the bed pad and I will pivot the patient into the wheelchair. And I will count to 3 and say lift, and on lift I will transfer the patient. Ready? 1, 2, lift. So now we're going to take the patient from the wheelchair back into the bed following the same procedure. The second precaution is a sternal precaution. The transfer procedure for this is the same as the first precaution, except I'm going to have the patient hug a pillow across their chest. And I'm going to remind the patient to not reach or push or pull with their upper extremity when they're moving in bed or getting into bed or into a wheelchair or out of either. And also remind the patient not to twist the trunk or bend at the trunk. And if they need to bend, they can bend at the hips. Also, if the great saphenous vein was harvested from the lower extremity, you're going to extend the knee slightly of the affected limb so that it takes pressure off of the surgical site. And then you perform the transfer the same exact way. Now we're going to take the patient from the wheelchair back to the bed following the same procedure. Right? 1, 2, 3, lift. Precaution number 3 is a hemiplegia precaution. Remember to never pull on the paralyzed limb. You can place the weak arm in a sling, and you're going to use a gait belt during this transfer. You also want to ensure that the patient's lower extremity is in the proper position. This means that the knee is bent and the ankle is placed behind the knee. The foot is flat on the floor, and if the patient's hip is externally rotated, you want to make sure that their knee is in line with the pelvis. So for the transfer, I'm going to place my feet on either side of the weak lower extremity. I'm going to instruct the patient to lean their head and upper trunk away from the direction of transfer so that their shoulder is in my hip. And then I will grasp the gait belt by putting my thumbs underneath the gait belt and my fingers facing down towards the pelvis to facilitate liftoff. And then I will pivot the patient into the wheelchair. So I'm going to ensure proper positioning of the leg. All right, go ahead. I'll pick you up on 3. 1, 2, 3, lift. Now we're going to take the patient from the wheelchair and put him back in the bed following the same procedure. So I'm going to make sure his weak lower extremity is in the proper position. And then I will guide the weak knee using my knees again. And go ahead and lean this shoulder to this hip. Ready? 1, 2, 3, lift. This concludes skill 26, dependent one-person sit pivot transfer from bed to chair and back while maintaining precautions.